Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, welcome back to part 6 of our exploration of a Reddit thread talking about why isn't one-page rules dominating the tabletop gaming industry. If you haven't seen the other 5 parts, I recommend checking out those first, or you can just stick around as we dive back in. So, jumping back in and picking up where we left off, the next comment here is by Launchpad62, who said, I wish there was a clear answer to this, but there is not. My buddy keeps trying to get me to join his group, but I just can't do it. GW's rules are terrible. My current armies are not good, Grey Knights and Genestealer cults, and I ask all the time why they don't go to free OPR, and they just do not seem interested, and I can never get a clear answer as to why. For me, I think at least with this particular grouping, it's about competitiveness and winning. And then he goes on and mentions their specific army lists. Well, okay, he has a fair point that overall makes sense, but in the specifics, maybe not quite as much. What I mean by that is, GW, we know power creep is real. Every new codex is the most powerful for 6 months, then they nerf the army. It's a sales tactic by boosting performance, which is really a bad idea. But he does have a point that if you are into a competitive gaming scene where it's really all about building the absolute min-max list, crushing your opponents, OPR is not the game for you. Now, OPR does have a competitive element to it. There's the competitive rule sets that in the advanced rulebook that they have. There are tournaments for it, but it hasn't quite reached that level of super competitiveness. We don't have major league OPR in the sense that you have like the Las Vegas Open or some of the massive tournaments you have over in Europe. It's not there yet. And I've always wondered, someone definitely chime in if you know a little bit more about this. Is it because GW is so imbalanced and there's no attempt to balance it? That's why the competitiveness remains. Because you're constantly looking for what new army is broken, what rule have they not fixed, what loophole can you discover. Whereas with one-page rules, I'm not saying it's perfectly balanced, but it's more balanced, and therefore the competitiveness, it's not there as much. If the armies are totally balanced, then it's a lot more to dice rolls. Whereas if armies are imbalanced, you can get special rules and build army lists that will really, really minimize the amount that your dice can hurt you. But getting off topic here, the point is, OPR does not scratch the competitive itch to the same degree that GW does. Even if you are competitive and you think OPR does have it, how many OPR tournaments are there? How many big ones are there? How often can you actually go against a big group of players in a highly competitive scene? It's just not there yet. Now, we're not going to read the next comments because these ones here are just commenting to him. I read over them really quickly before I started this up, and they're just addressing his Grey Knights and Genestealers not being the best, so we don't need to worry about that. Same here. So we'll move on to Dave Pack here, who says a lot of good comments here, some really hitting on many fronts: marketing, IP, investment, etc. There are a lot of positive reasons to like OPR. For my group, one of the biggest reasons is this: all our GW models, they work fine with the OPR rules. Some players don't mind as much the model cost, and for them, OPR still has big benefits, the biggest being this. Didn't you just say that? You only have to buy a new model if you think it's cool, not because of codex creep to sell new models. Yes, the rules are good. Yes, the community's good. Yes, you can use all sorts of cool OPR-themed STLs and print your own. Heck, I'm making a Star Host army just because space dinosaurs. However, for a lot of my friends, not having rules tied to models and marketing, that is the biggest draw. The rest, streamlined rules, alternating activations, free rules, community, etc., is just a bonus on top. So I think here he has a very valid point that you can bring any models you want to the table. That's one of OPR's strongest, strengths. They have their own set models. You have the GW line you can use, but if you find something else, go ahead and bring it, as long as it's not ridiculous. As long as you're not putting little goblins on the table and telling me that they're titans, we can usually come to an agreement about model proxying. So yeah, that's definitely a big thing. However, he's also, unwittingly acknowledged some of the criticisms made by other people on this whole thread, is how much OPR is dependent on 40K. So as long as 40K is basically irritating players, OPR will continue to gain players. But if, and here's a question that has just occurred to me, so let's throw it out there. If 40K were to fix its problems, let's say they were to quit the rules creep, they were to make their codexes free, if they were to get rid of some of the things that drive people away, like when I left 40K, if they were to get rid of that, would I go back to it? As someone else mentioned, the lore. OPR basically is carbon copy of 40K lore. And then here he's saying that it's just the models, the ability to use the same models. So that's a very strong argument. You put all that in one basket, that's a strong argument that OPR can't ever overtake 40K because it needs the anger that players have from 40K to drive them to OPR. And if 40K were to fix many of its problems, OPR would no longer provide that service, shall we say, or fill that gap. So that's just me thinking out loud. I'd have to think about that one over time. But let's move on here. Well, look at that. Font Bro. It basically is 40K. The only meaningful difference is that it trades flavor and depth for balance and simplicity. I think that's actually very concise and well said. Although the depth, everyone keeps saying depth, but they can never explain what that means. Now, flavor, I'm going to take that in terms of lore, which I think he has a valid point. But depth, like what does that mean? Does it mean your armies aren't complicated enough? Does it mean you're just not used to being able to fit a full game in under 2 hours? Does it mean not having to look up in a book to figure out what the heck you're supposed to do every 5 minutes suddenly makes you feel like the game's too simple? I mean, just think of that for a moment. Imagine if you started Fire Still by using a bow or whatever it's called, by rubbing 2 sticks together, and then someone shows you a lighter and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so simplistic. Is it simplistic or is it just the better way of doing it? What I love about OPR is the fact that I can play 4,000 and 5,000 point games with enough models to almost rival 40K Apocalypse and still be done in 3 hours, whereas a base game of 40K takes about 3 hours. In fact, just earlier this week, I chatted with a guy, played a game, chatted with a guy in the time that it took the table next to us to get halfway through their game of 40K. But I do think he has an interesting point here that it is 40K. I mean, if you remember at the start of the thread, we learned it was originally called One Page 40K. And as it grew, OPR said, I think we might be onto something that we can break away and make our own. So then down here, this post right under it says, I started with OPR as my intro to wargames. And while I really enjoyed it, I eventually moved into 40K 10th edition. For me, it was the feeling that OPR, while fun, lacked depth. Whether it's true or not, I'm sure, but that's what I felt. Okay, that's great, but your feelings, what does that mean? Everyone keeps using this word. Is depth just another word for complexity? Is depth a word for tons of codexes? Does depth mean I have to constantly update my armies to keep up with the meta? Like, what does depth mean? If someone can please, in one of these posts, be a little bit more specific. It seems like they're just throwing out the word because it means everything. And so without actually being able to pin down their comment, they can say, oh, it lacks depth, and then move on. But it's still a fair point, like he says at the bottom here. I think OPR is great. I just prefer 40K. So he started with OPR, and then there was something more. Maybe it was the complexity. Maybe some people really love the idea of a 4-hour game where you barely get to turn 2. They enjoy that. Some don't. But depth. Come on, folks. Define depth. All right. Now, new improvement says it's all personal preference. Well, yes. I like OPR because it doesn't have gotchas. Rules are worded in a legal way or the constant push to buy more. Oh, okay. Oh, I get it. So 3 different things here. I was reading that rules are worded as a extension of the gotchas, like a clause. So it doesn't have gotchas, it doesn't have legalese, and there's not a constant push to buy more. So, let's take those one at a time. Gotchas. All gotcha means is you don't tell your opponent about a rule until it works against them. So if at the start of your turn you tell your opponent, I'm playing Robot Legions, they've never played Robot Legions, and you don't mention the self-repair rule until the first time they attack you, you fail your save, and then when you don't start removing models, they go, what are you doing? You're like, oh, I forgot I have self-repair. Technically, that's a gotcha. So there's a difference between a gotcha and just not exhausting your opponent by telling them every single thing you have at the beginning. I think that's more about a style of player than necessarily the rules. Now, granted, the more complicated a game's rules are, the more likely it is you'll forget something until it triggers, and then you remember, oh yeah, that rule doesn't apply to me, whereas your opponent was hoping that rule would be the key to their tactic paying off. So I don't know about that one. The rules being worded in a legal way. Yes, I'm starting to see that a little bit more in OPR, but the whole reason of that is because people exploit them. If you post rules and you go based on spirit of the law, like you're just trying to get people to understand the basic idea that whenever you suffer a wound, this thing happens. But then you always have that person who in a tournament will say, well, does it apply this way because it isn't written? As soon as you bring in competitive play, you have to start wording your rules more specifically. And then because games like 40K have become so extremely competitive, that's where you get rules that almost sound like you're reading contract language. So that one I would agree with. And then the last one, the constant push to buy more. Again, I'll push back on that one. Every tabletop game has the constant push to buy more. If you have what I've heard people mention in the past as tabletop ADHD, where every game you see looks exciting, you'd want to try it, there is a push to try lots of stuff. Now, I do get what they mean, that in 40K, it's not a push so much as a keep buying or you can't play. That's a little different. But even in OPR, they constantly, every 6 months or so, release an entirely new line of miniatures, or at least of STLs, and you can buy them, but it's really cheap, so it doesn't feel like that much. You join the Patreon, $10 a month. Every 6 months, you have a new army. So there is a push to buy, but if it's $10 a month, that's not a big deal. Whereas every 3 years, you're going to spend $60 for a new codex, $60 to $100 for a new rule book. That's a little bit different. So the push to buy more, that's how a business stays in business. I would agree with him if he had worded it more as the requirement to buy more. But maybe I'm being nitpicky. But let's move on here. He says, others don't like OPR because they don't feel like they can pull off a sick combo that catches opponents off guard, which is kind of called a gotcha. Can't argue the finer implications of rules, which ties to the words being worded in a legal way, and because armies don't get new stuff frequently enough. Okay, so he's basically just said the same sentence twice here. And then finishing up, it also boils down to how long the games have been going. GW's almost 50, and their major games would be about 40. 40 years of lore, models, battles, personal investment. OPR is 10, and can't compete with that kind of money that GW has already pulling in from D&D and chainmail sales when they started the Warhammer Fantasy Battles and Warhammer 40K. So these are all very valid points. I think some of them I would want a little bit more nuance to them, but they're valid points. All right, the white dot says, I really enjoy one page. I like the alternative turn sequence immensely, and I think a lot of people like that. The you go, I go, it feels like a slap fight. It honestly does. People aren't as into it as Warhammer 40K for a few reasons. Nostalgia is massive. People have paid for the official models and so want to play the official rules. Well, but we saw above, a lot of people think OPR is kind of doing that. Some prefer the complexity of the original games. They don't own a 3D printer or are model snobs and only like to play with official products. While that is true, not everyone owns a 3D printer. Etsy now exists. Model snobs, well, I mean, GW requires you to use it. That's not exactly model snobs. And only like to play with official products. Yes, but at the same time, one thing I have never denied is that GW makes beautiful models. So it's not that people don't want to use anything, but it's just their models are really, really good. And so the more use you can get out of them, maybe by playing a different game or a game you can play more often, it's increasing your investment. Moving on, he says, I think one page is fantastic. I would really love a good digital version like Scove. I think that's what the game on Steam for old-style Warhammer is called. I think give it time. If one-page rules continues on this track, you'll start to see maybe some small independent company make a game of theirs, and then if it does well, a bigger game company, or you'll see one-page rules just slowly grow and build up a fan base until it's large enough that a bigger company in general just says, hey, let's make a game. The one thing that's going to get in the way of that, though, is the lore. Games have to have a story in order for them to be worth playing. And if OPR is just borrowing 40K lore, everyone's going to say, well, why not play Dawn of War? Because then I get the same feeling with the same models. I don't have to worry about the crunch because a computer's doing that for me. Unless OPR can offer something different in storyline, or unless they come up with some armies that aren't in 40K that are really, really exciting to play, it'll be more difficult. Finishes off here. He says, what's holding it back is they currently don't have a model set for every army, but this game doesn't need to. This games doesn't need to. It would if it wanted to go down the digital route, which I'm pretty sure they aren't caring about, and I respect that as well. Well, this was a year ago. They've released a lot of new armies. Eventually, I imagine they're going to do everything. So if that's the only thing that's holding them back, then it's just a matter of time. So I don't think it's just that. All right, DJ 1066. Something about Normandy. All right. Well, I would certainly not say it's objectively better. And I say this as someone who finds 10th 40K to be a bucket of water one washes the ice cream scoop in the proverbial world of 31 flavors. Okay, I wasn't sure where he was going with that, but now that I'm picturing it, I'm like, dang, that's kind of harsh. That said, it's just the same thing that happens with OPR. It's just the same as is happening with many games since time immemorial. It's something the owner of the local gaming store I go to has picked up on since he opened it up over a decade ago. Gamers are a bloody flaky bunch. They'll tell you they'll commit to something and never follow through with it. Believe me, it was like pulling teeth trying to get people to play War Machine when that store first opened, despite the sheer volume of rubberneckers you had when seeing me and others playing games of it. Yes, guys, you no longer just have a GW store in a city. You can play whatever you darn well like in this building, yet they continue to just play 40K. So that could be his location. At my local gaming store, 40K is one of the smaller communities. Now, the Kill Team community is pretty big, but the Marvel community is huge. The historical gaming community is pretty big. The OPR community, we usually have somewhere between 5, 6, averaging maybe 4 to 6 people every single week. And that's more than people come in to play 40K. Now, granted, there are 2 other gaming stores in town that are much, much more focused on 40K. People come to Waterloo specifically because it's not just 40K. But let's move on. He says the same phenomenon is happening here. I literally just played a game of Grinbark Future today against the said owner in his store, and we got plenty of people looking over. We told them what it was, as on first glance it looked like a game of 40K and peak sub-interest. But I'm beyond begging people to play now after my experiences with Warmahordes. Some gamers are just set in their ways and won't try anything new despite there being zero financial investment on their part. I think he means risk. Well, investment, I suppose. But yeah, there's nothing to lose in trying it. You have the models, the rules are free. I get it. It's frustrating as you're operating in a niche within a niche, and I really want more opponents as every game I seem to be attracted to has like no one who wants to play it. I actually put in like. But you're not going to get far forcing people. OPR, to me, seems to attract a certain type of gamer that's already in possession of a large collection of minis and is probably a tad disillusioned with GW, but still wants to use their toy soldiers. Let them come around, don't force it on them. I think he has an excellent point here, especially at the end here, when he says right now OPR is filled, obviously this doesn't speak to everyone, OPR is filled with disillusioned 40K players who still want to use their models. But in my gaming community, there are people who don't have any 40K. They got into it starting off with one-page rules. And so I think what he's mentioning here, when he says don't force it, let them come around on their own, that was a year ago. I think we're starting to see it. All right, let's look at a couple more here because we're getting close to the 20-minute mark. So this post says sunken cost fallacy. Having spent thousands on GW miniatures, so we're okay with putting up with the shoddy rules. I mean, while that's true, that's such a lame excuse because you can still use the models in OPR and the game feels the same. So while I agree that people feel that way, that's a really awful, illogical reasoning. What's up, Herbert? Says, my 2 cents why I play 40K more than OPR. My local gaming club has a lot of 40K players. There are 40K evenings every 2 weekends. I'm not a person who would start an OPR alternative. I stick to 40K models because of the lore that I read, the video games I play, and I've enjoyed it for over 15 years. So right here, he summed up a lot of the concerns that people have mentioned. The momentum, the ability to find a game, the chance to not have to play just the same person over and over and over, but to have at least a small group, and the fact that it's got a great world to spend time in. And there you have part 6. Don't worry, folks, we're getting close to the end, only 2 or 3 parts left. So until those appear, keep your dice on the table.